to various constitutional posts, powers, functions and responsibilities of various constitutional bodies. Q1. What is office of profit? How do courts or EC decide whether an MP or MLA has profited from an office? What is the underlying principle for including office of profit as criterion for disqualification? Examine 250 words. The Indian Express background. One of the basic disqualifications criteria for an MP as laid down in Article 102 of the Constitution, and for an MLA in Article 191 is holding an office of profit under Government of India or state government. Indian President accepted the Election Commission's recommendation to disqualify 20 MLAs of Delhi's ruling AAM My Party for holding offices of profit, recently bringing the issue to the spotlight again. Office of profit. The expression office of profit has not been defined in the Constitution or in the Representation of the People Act, 1951. It is for the courts to explain the significance and meaning of this concept. Over the years, courts have decided this issue in the context of specific factual situations. But Articles 101 and 191, which give effect to the concept of office of profit, prescribe restrictions at the central and state level on lawmakers accepting government positions. Any violation attracts disqualification of MPs or MLAs, as the case may be. Four broad principles have evolved for determining whether an office attracts the constitutional disqualification. First, whether the government exercises control over appointment, removal and performance of the functions of the office. Second, whether the office has any remuneration attached to it. Third, whether the body in which the office is held has government powers, releasing money, allotment of land, granting licenses, etc. Fourth, whether the office enables the holder to influence by way of patronage. How do courts or EC decide whether an MP or MLA has profited from an office? The Supreme Court, while upholding the disqualification of Jaya Bachchan from Rajya Sabha in 2006, had said before deciding the question as to whether one is holding an office of profit or not, what is relevant is whether the office is capable of yielding a profit or pecuniary gain, and not whether the person actually obtained a monetary gain. www.insightsinIndia.com 23 www.insightsis.com. If the office carries with it or entitles the holder to any pecuniary gain other than reimbursement of out-of-pocket/actual expenses, then the office will be an office of profit for the purpose of Article 101A. However, the person who acquires a contract or license from the government to perform functions which the government would have itself discharged will not be held guilty of holding an office of profit. So, acquiring the gas agency from the government or holding a permit to ply do not amount to holding office of profit. What is the underlying principle for including office of profit as criterion for disqualification? Makers of the Constitution wanted that legislators should not feel obligated to the executive in any way, which could influence them while discharging legislative functions. In other words, an MP or MLA should be free to carry out her duties without any kind of governmental pressure. At the outset, it should be noted that the disqualification doesn't relate to having any other job or profession. It refers specifically to a position with the central government or a state/UD government. This is because the idea behind providing for this disqualification is to ensure that there is no conflict of interest between the legislature and the executive. It also seeks to enforce the principle of separation of power between the legislative, the judiciary and the executive, the basic feature of the Constitution. Way forward, unlike in India. In England, whenever a new office is created, the law also lays down whether it would be an office of profit or not. India can follow similar approach as well. Topic: Functions and responsibilities of various constitutional bodies. Q1. Analyze the evolution of the Election Commission of India and its effectiveness in ensuring inclusiveness, rule of law, efficiency, and accountability of the election process. 250 words. BPW background. Election Commission of India (ECI) is one of the most popular and effective public institutions in India. The ECI is situated within a particular legal framework and a socio-political context that has changed over time. In this changing context, the institutional characteristics of the ECI role, powers, independence, structure, and functioning have allowed it to ensure free and fair elections with varying success. Evolution of EC. The Constituent Assembly provided for the ECI in the Constitution because of its commitment to free and fair elections, and its concern that citizens should exercise their franchise without discrimination. This led to its formation in 1950. Evolution took place in 5 phases. Phase 1 1950 to 67 establishing institutional credibility, despite the challenges of mammoth population about to vote in the first election, lack of sufficient infrastructure of governance systems, lack of literacy. The ECI was able to translate the spirit of democracy into the free and fair conduct of elections by developing processes that were people-friendly and transparent. EC introduced the marking system by the ballot paper bore names, party affiliations, and candidates' symbols, which made it easy for the voters to vote. Although in 1956 the reorganization of states and the delimitation of constituencies made it very difficult to hold the second general elections on time, the ECI wanted to avoid the precedent of extending the lids of parliament and legislative assemblies at all costs, and lauded to prevent the postponement of elections. Autonomy enabled the ECI to embed impartiality and transparency into its processes, and to take quick decisions and innovate. Because of its narrow subject area, the ECI became a highly expert organization, and consequently, very efficient. The ECI's efficiency was enhanced further as it could simultaneously make rules, implement them, and review them as required. www.insightsindia.com 24 www.insightses.com. ECI could issue detailed administrative directions to the states regarding the design of ballot boxes and papers, location of polling stations, and so on, and the states benefited from the ECI's growing expertise. Election petitions before courts. Another significant development was that courts decided to hear election petitions. Though there was no such provision in the Constitution. Phase 2 1967 to 75 emerging limitations in the second phase. The ECI was tested as the single-party domination of the polity began to decline and political competition increased. There were law and order issues in the form of group clashes. Election meetings were disturbed. Instances of assault, kidnapping, murder, personation, looting, arson, rioting, etc. were also reported. While the rule of law in elections declined, the ECI was still able to administer elections efficiently. The ECI's skills were tested in a new way in the 5th general elections, as for the first time, the ECI had to conduct all India elections before these were due. At this time, as several political parties split, the ECI began to decide which group within a split party would keep the original symbol. By the end of the second phase, with the declaration of the emergency, democracy was threatened and elections due in March 1976 were cancelled. Significant changes were made to the election law. Phase 3 1977 to 90 the deepening crisis. In the third phase, key shortcomings in the ECI's institutional design that became apparent was that it had inadequate control over the state election machinery that actually conducted the elections, and could not stop politicians from flouting the law. In the face of declining political support for free and fair elections, this impacted the ECI's capacity to enforce the rule of law in elections, which made them less inclusive. Phase 4 1991 to 2002 fight back and consolidation. The ECI waged a continuous, acrimonious, and public battle with the political establishment and the central and state governments to restore the rule of law in elections. This time, it was successful. The CEC's leadership was decisive and effective. The ECI also stated that unless electoral photo identity cards were provided to all eligible voters, no polling would take place. The ECI became proactive in ensuring that the MCC was followed, and expressed open displeasure when it was violated. It banned the transfer of officials on election duty without its prior permission. It monitored the election process more closely by enhancing a role of election observers and monitoring officials. In 1993, the government promulgated an ordinance for the appointment of 2 election commissioners. Since then, the ECI has been a 3-member body. The success of EC role in Gujarat in 2002 added to its autonomy, impartiality, and internal accountability, without taking away from quick decision-making. Phase 5 2000 to present deeper problems that had stemmed the electoral violence and large-scale voter intimidation, voter personation, and booth capturing. In ensuring the rule of law in elections, it made the election process more inclusive, enabling marginalized communities to exercise their franchise. In the current context, Political actors and officials do not flout the ECI's directions easily. Attacks on the ECI by political actors are now usually restrained, largely because of the public and media support for the ECI. With the introduction of EVMs in 1998, which were used across the country in 2004, the polling and counting processes became smoother. Inclusiveness. Concerns about inclusiveness led to an innovation, the use of large pictorial symbols, by which illiterate voters could identify their preferred candidate. The press was taken into confidence, and their cooperation for generating awareness was sought. The ECI's rigorous approach is illustrated by its handling of women who were unwilling to provide their names to register as voters. It used persuasion and made women as voters. Rule of law. Although the model code was originally based on political consensus and does not still enjoy statutory sanction, it served as a handy tool for placing curbs on the abuse of the official machinery for campaigning. www.insightsanindia.com 25 www.insightsays.com. The EC regularly instructs police stations in each constituency to initiate preventive measures and take action against those who were involved in electoral offenses in the past and against habitual offenders and antisocial elements. According to data from EC website, during the 2014 general election, the staggering number of people to 5,892 were identified as possible intimidators and action was taken against 18,227 of them. Efficiency. The ECI constantly reviewed and improved its processes, making them more efficient. EVM is introduced to make elections more effective. Most elections in recent times have been peaceful with high voter turnout due to Election Commission to prevent personation in voting. The ECI made another innovation of marking each voter's finger with indelible ink. Accountability. The ECI took several measures to quash rumors and suspicions regarding the elections and consulted political actors often even since the start. After the Election Commission was made a three-membered body, its functioning became more institutionalized and more transparent with little room for the caprices of an overbearing personality. The ECI enhanced public accountability in various processes requiring a list of polling stations be published for objections, refining the process of hearing objections to the voter list, and so on in the first phase itself. Challenges remain though. The lacunae in the process of appointing the CEC and the election commissioners were evident again in 2008. The ugly spat in 2009 between the election commissioners, for instance. The increasing role of money power in the form of voter bribery and funding of political parties. Political parties continue to put up criminals as candidates, the manipulation of the media through paid news and other means. The ECI has attempted to address these issues by appointing expenditure observers, counter